Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, where we're counting down. Now we're down to weeks until the start of training camp. Just because it's July 4th weekend doesn't mean we stop talking football. And Geoff Mosher joins us for another edition of Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Josh Hennick filling in for Mike Gill here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher joins us on the phone here. Jeff, how are you doing on this day before July 4th?
Just enjoying the holiday the best I can, Josh.
So basically, you're getting more fresh air than I am, is what you're saying.
Yes, I am.
Jeff, I wanted to start with this with you because obviously, as you guys are doing on the Inside the Birds pod, you got the pod that dropped with you guys talking with Greg Cosell about the NFC East, about the teams in the NFC East with the Eagles. And right now, obviously, things can change at the end of the training camp. But what is your feeling about the Eagles' competition? Like, the conversation has been about what is the gap between the Eagles and the rest of the NFC East. For Geoff Mosher, what is the gap? What is the delineation?
You know what? It's not the NFC East anymore, Josh. And Washington, here's what's interesting. Washington's been a joke for a little bit, although, they made the playoffs a couple of years ago when they won the division with a losing record. But if you think back to the first time the Eagles played Washington, which was a big Eagles win, 9 sacks of Carson Wentz, right? Now they've got Sam Howell at quarterback, and you could say, well, this guy's unproven. He hasn't done much, but it's going to be hard to sack Sam Howell 9 times because he's a mobile quarterback, guys. Part of that, he's not Josh Allen, he's not Jalen Hurts, but he's a lot more mobile than Carson Wentz is. And I expect them with Eric Bieniemy to be a much more diversified offense, a diversified run game. They've got some really good running backs. Brian Robinson hopefully won't have any issues like that last year, unfortunately, when I think he was shot, right? He was a victim of being shot. So he should enter training camp healthy. They're got to figure out what they're going to be doing with Antonio Gibson, who has a role as a running back. He's not a between the tackles runner, but he passes the ball. They drafted another running back. They're going to run the ball because that's what Ron Rivera likes, and they brought in Eric Bieniemy to be not what you would call a boring running team. They're gonna diversify it. And one thing Greg Cosell said is this won't be a Patrick Mahomes offense with Eric Bieniemy presiding over it, but maybe more like the Alex Smith offense when Andy Reid first got there. Got Alex Smith, another guy who had some mobility, another guy who was accurate, and then they really leaned on. What was that running back that they had before back then from Texas? Who was Jamal Charles, right? Not that any of their running backs are of that caliber, but the point Greg Cosell was trying to make, and I think it's a valid one, is that this should be a more efficient offense. Shouldn't be a drop back and sack Carson Wentz 9 times type of offense. There are playmakers at the wide receiver level, and so if Sam Howell can just be efficient on play action, using that run game to his advantage, at least more efficient than Carson was to stay healthy, then this team can be a decent team. They were decent at stretches last year. Of course, they beat the Eagles that one game.
Yep. The other thing with Washington is you mentioned Sam Howell. I won't forget the fact that Howell was a big-time quarterback prospect before half of his team graduated, and he had to go out there and run around for his life. It was almost like it was almost like what happened with Sam Darnold. Like Darnold, the 1 year was really good, then everyone left USC, and he wasn't as good. And you look at what Howell was the year before he left North Carolina, and you look what North Carolina did this past year with Dustin May. It's not far-fetched to think that if you give Sam Howell some legitimate talent around him, he could be a good quarterback.
Yeah, and he does have, right? He's got Terry McLaurin. He's got Jahan Dotson, who had a really nice rookie year. So he's got some weapons. They obviously have Curtis Samuel, who I think in an Eric Bieniemy movement-type offense will have his talents capitalized. They'll be able to move around, jet sweep him, motion him, and really capitalize on that. The big question is the offensive line. The offensive line is not great. It seems like Washington year after year has to learn the hard way that when you don't address the offensive line early and often or in free agency, then you pay the price with either quarterback injuries or an inefficient offense. But Sam steps into a situation where if the offensive line isn't terrible and the running game is as good as it should be, he's got weapons to throw to. If they can work play action to guys like McLaurin and Dotson and, they have a good tight end who can catch Logan Thomas, who can catch the ball and has proven to be a mismatch issue at times, then this team can be pretty good. Like the way I see this team, Josh, is that they probably want to win games 24-20, 21-16, because I'm sure we'll get to it. I mean, they have a really, really good defense. So all they need is that offense to be functional and productive, be good situationally, third down, red zone, and they can be a decent team. They've got talent.
The other thing, you mentioned Eric Bieniemy earlier. I want to go back to him for a moment. I feel like every head coaching cycle we heard about him, how he should be a head coach, and this is an opportunity for him to get out of Andy Reid's shadow. So I feel like that, Bieniemy, he's kind of taking advantage of the opportunity to be like, hey, this is my chance to show the world what I can do, and not in Andy Reid's shadow. And you got to think, a guy motivated like that, he's not going to come out there and, put out a bad offense. Like, whatever people think of Eric Bieniemy, it's hard to bet against the guy who's motivated.
100%. Hungry dogs run faster, right? We learned that with the Eagles in 2017. So hungry assistant coordinators coach better too, I'm told. So, so I would expect that you're going to get the best of Eric Bieniemy. And I think it's cool that Eric has another young quarterback to kind of work with in Sam Howell, who, by the way, we were just talking about a minute ago. I heard Daniel Jeremiah recently say on a podcast that he felt that the NFL missed on Sam Howell. And this guy hasn't even really played a whole lot yet, right? But he liked Sam Howell a lot. But I think, what was Howell, Josh? A fifth-round pick or something like that?
It was either fourth or fifth round. I'll double-check real quick.
Fourth or fifth rounder, yeah. Greg Cosell said the same thing. They thought Howell, if you graded him like you were mentioning, on not last year, the year before, not his last year in college, but the year before,
right?
Much better than his final year, where, as you mentioned, he lost so many of his offensive line and receivers, and he just tried to do too much. But when he played within himself, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and he should be able to play within himself on this Washington team again, so long as he's protected. I mean, there are some questions. Left tackle Charles Leno played all right last year. Can you do that again? They're moving Sam Cosmi, who was a second-round pick a couple of years ago, from right tackle to right guard. So that's kind of an interesting move because he's kind of a big, lengthy guy. You like a tackle, but they're moving him to right guard. And we'll see how that works out. And they've always had some interior offensive line issues, so we'll see if they've got that rectified. I still think it's a better offensive line than they've put out the last 2 years, but is it good enough to compete against a defensive line that's as good as Philadelphia is, as good as Dallas is, and as good as the Giants, who are improving on the D-line as well? That's kind of the big question for them.
Sam Howell, fifth-round pick, and he went from having 30 touchdowns one year to the next year 24 touchdowns, 68% completion percentage to 62. And I don't care who you are, if your receivers can't catch, you're going to have some struggling stats. So, and I remember watching North Carolina that year, and I was like, his receivers are really bad. So
yeah, and the funny thing is, he's with Washington. He's back with DAndre Brown, who a lot of people like coming out of college. He hasn't really parlayed that success in the NFL. And, if you talk to some people, they think, well, Sam Howell made him into a draft pick. He's not that good of a wide receiver, but Sam Howell had a good connection with him 2 years ago. And, it's easy to say now that they're back together, there'll be a connection again. But unfortunately for DAndre Brown, I mean, he's looking up at the depth chart saying, well, I got McLaurin, Dotson ahead of me, and some other guys too. So Milne, another guy who might be a little bit better than the average fan realizes. So there's some weapons on that team.
Before we move on from Washington, one more question about them and obviously we don't know the exact answer to this, so I'm asking you to throw out a little conjecture, Geoff, and that is, Ron Rivera obviously has had to be the face of a disaster organization the last few years with Daniel Snyder. Now Snyder is going to be moving out, new ownership coming in. Could there be new ownership create a better football environment in Washington for an organization that basically asked Ron Rivera to take the bullets for them because they were a bunch of irresponsible idiots?
Well, I mean, it can't get worse, right? I mean, I think they've kind of sort of hit rock bottom from an organizational ownership and management standpoint. And yeah, it feels like Ron Rivera has had to sort of moonlight as not only the head coach, but also spokesperson, PR guy, GM, culture changer, and all that. And that can be a lot. I mean, you kind of go back to the Andy Reid era, right, in Philadelphia when he became executive vice president of football operations or personnel, whatever it was. He started to take on more and more, and then he became less of a head coach, and you saw that impact in the second half of the Andy Reid era on the Eagles. It just became a little bit too much. And so I think it would be best for Ron Rivera. I'm sure he'd be the first to say, hey, if I was just Ron Rivera, the head football coach of the Washington Commanders, I'd be a whole lot better off than having to answer for the entire organization every time he gets dragged through the mud, which is seemingly, once a week. So I think that if the new ownership can bring some stability, just ethically and morally be a good ownership group and get things righted there, then Ron Rivera can just worry about coaching because he's a pretty good coach when all he has to do is be the head coach.
Talk with Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com here on Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennig filling for Mike Gill on a Monday edition on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, you can follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff P. Mosher. Geoff, over on InsideTheBirds.com, you and Andrew have started your season preview series, and the guy that both of you have highlighted in your most recent piece is Jalen Carter. And a lot of people around who cover the league nationally feel like Jalen Carter is a major key to this team moving forward because this was a guy that people forget. You take away the all the speeding issues and all the incidents that happened off the field, but he was a guy that was considered potentially the number one overall pick. And you got to think that if this guy can just get his head on right, he could be a force of nature for the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, he really should be, Josh. I mean, because there's really not a whole lot of question marks to his game. I mean, he can be a run stopper. He can be a pass rusher. He's kind of those, what you call a force multiplier in the middle where he can make teammates better. And he's going to be given every opportunity to come and make an impact early. Like a guy like Nolan Smith may have better athletic traits and measurables because he's so explosive. But how do you get him on the field as much when you've already got Hassan Reddick on one side and Josh Sweat on the other, and you've got Brandon Graham, and you've got Derek Barnett coming back for an injury? Of course, he'll get on the field if he's good, but it's going to be part of a rotation. Same thing with Sidney Brown. I think Sidney Brown you can make an argument for, and Tyler Steen, who's competing at right guard, that they may have more of an impact in the starting lineup as far as seeing them getting playing time. They may have more impact in snaps. But when you're talking about just getting in the game and being disruptive, Jalen Carter should be that guy. He has everything the Eagles look for in a defensive tackle, everything most teams look for in a D tackle. And if you look at their 5-man front, if Jordan Davis is the middleman, he's got to be surrounded by 2 other DTs, right? Fletcher Cox, most likely the other, and we'll see how much playing time he gets. But Kentavious Street versus Jalen Carter, I mean, the doorway is there for Jalen Carter to just be himself and be able to walk into that role and make an impact.
You mentioned about the snap count, about how Carter's not going to be asked to play all the snaps, but he also came from a situation in Georgia where he was also part of rotation. So
yes,
is potentially, in your mind, Carter having been in a rotation at Georgia, now being asked to be part of a rotation with the Eagles, maybe that could be a benefit for him?
Well, I mean, you look around the league, right, Josh, and you know that in most cases, I don't know too many defensive linemen in the NFL that play 100% of the snaps. So, yeah, rotating at Georgia, it can be a plus and a minus. A, you're used to it, but B, if you look at like Jordan Davis, for example, who only played a certain number of snaps, not just because of the rotation, but because of weight and conditioning. He came to the NFL and he wasn't really ready to play any more snaps than they were already giving him, and he was already starting to lose technique at pad level. I don't think that'll be an issue with Jalen Carter. It's not like he's some kind of freakish 350 pounds. Jalen Carter's built like most of your defensive tackles that you see. But the fact that he played in rotation, yes, he'll be used to that at the NFL level. And I'm sure he understands, like, when you're only playing, say, 40 to 50%, you can go harder. You can do everything because you know that you're going to get more rest. It's not like when you're playing safety, right? Malcolm Jenkins used to play 1,000+ snaps a year. So by the fourth quarter, you got to credit that guy. I mean, to still be able to play, but he's on the field the entire time. Defensive linemen don't have to worry about that, and they get accustomed to that in the college level.
Geoff, something I wanted to ask you about also with Carter and the Eagles is that, the story about Georgia was that, the Nico Dean was like the police officer of the Georgia locker room. He was like, the boss. He kept everybody in line. And that the idea is that as soon as Dean and other guys left Georgia, that it kind of left guys like Jalen Carter without the same direction in the locker room. Is it fair enough to say that maybe Nico Dean could be the key to keeping Jalen Carter in check?
It's been said that Jordan Davis is actually that person because Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter were very, very close at Georgia. Nico Dean was part of that crew too, though. I mean, I have to think that was a tight-knit defense to begin with. Everything that Adam and I have been told from Inside the Birds on Jalen Carter so far is that he's been coachable, he's come in, he's been accountable, he's been responsible, he's done everything you wanted him to do. And that's all that you need to hear from the start. It's not the talent, right, that you're questioning. It's whether he's laser focused on being the best football player that he can be. I do think it helps him. I normally would say that's overrated, but I do think it helps him that he comes to a team that has Jordan Davis and has Nico Dean for the reasons you just mentioned. Also, maybe Keely Ringo. It's starting to become Georgia of the Northeast, as we know. So maybe that comforting environment makes it easier on his transition and keeps his head in place. But also the Eagles have guys like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, Josh, who I think will also kind of step in and be that helping hand, that mentor to Jalen Carter, and let him know what's acceptable and what's not.
With all that being said, Geoff, what is a fair expectation for the Eagles defense? Because I'm starting to get the feeling, and maybe I'm wrong in looking at it this way, but I'm starting to get the feeling that this is probably going to be a defense that might have a slow start to the season. It might take a few weeks to really find their groove with so many new parts and with a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Josh. I mean, I think it's you have to be realistic about the situation and realize that the Eagles have rebuilt the entire middle section or underbelly of their defense. And I include Jordan Davis in that because he really didn't play a whole lot and lost his job to the street free agent signing last year in Linval Joseph. But starting in the middle with Linval and Jalen Carter, going to the linebacker level where you got Nico Dean and Nick Morrow, I assume for now, and right up to the safety where you now have two new safeties with Terrell Edmonds and I don't know, is it going to be Reed Blankenship? Is it going to be Sidney Brown? Doesn't really matter. Whoever it is, it's probably going to be a newcomer, right, in some form or fashion. So whenever you have a defense like that that's mostly new, yeah, it's going to take some time to gel. And I think opponents who have been studying the Eagles all year long because they know that they're defending NFC champs, they're going to be figuring out, hey, I think the place to hit this team is in the middle. We're going to try to run against them like the Chiefs did in the Super Bowl, like Washington did when they beat them. They're going to try to take advantage of that middle area in the passing game and make the Eagles prove it. Although you could argue the Eagles will be fine with that. All right, just, you want to beat us up the middle, fine. We're going to limit your big plays. And we have a great offense that can probably score 28 to 30 points a game. So we dare you to try to work your way down the field and still be able to score 30 against us. Should be a really interesting season just to see how it all comes together.
Geoff, before I let you go, I saved the most controversial question for last for you here. And that is, so last week on ESPN Radio National, they were doing a lot of those top 5 lists, right? And one of the list topics was top 5 NFL fan bases. And there was a debate about where the Eagles fall on that list. So for you, what are Eagle fans in terms of fan base rankings in the NFL? Are they a top 2, a top 4, a top 5? How would you classify them?
Well, what's the criteria that ESPN was using?
There was no criteria. It was just open-ended, opinionated.
Well, I mean, I would have to break it up into criteria. fans traveling to road games, Eagles top 3. No question about it. Maybe number 1, by the way. I mean, informal. I don't know. I know Steelers fans travel well. I've seen Dolphins fans travel well. Cowboys fans, can travel well. I feel like they just live, though, in most of these cities and just root for the Cowboys more than they're traveling. But Eagles fans travel as well as any fan base that there is. Obviously, they root their team on as well as any fan base as there is. They show up. They support the team. The interest level is high. I mean, I don't know. I think travel, teams that go to road games, it has to be a big sort of criteria, because other than that, what are we measuring it against? Every team loves their home team. They go to you sell out your home games. Of course, the Eagles sell out their home games. There are some teams that don't, so you eliminate them right from the bat. But I don't know of a fan base that travels as well and sells out the home games and absorbs Eagles content, or content in general more than Eagles fans. So if there's I would say they got to be 1 or tied for 1 with whoever else is good, because I don't know too many other fan bases that do what Eagles fans do.
I mean, for me, I feel like the Eagles are definitively a top 3 fan base, no matter how you want to classify them. To me, it's, because to me, part of it also is it's not, you're right, it's part of it is traveling. But another part of it is what kind of home environment you create. Like, there are a lot of times if you're watching a game on TV, you can audibly tell the difference between, for example, a Vikings game and a Texans game. You know what I mean? Just like use like 2 dome teams, Like there's an audible difference between an Eagles game, which is outside, and frankly a Jets game. No offense to some of these Jets fans. Like I feel like some of these fan bases are just different audible. They show up for the game than others.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And knowledgeability as well. I think Eagles fans are very knowledgeable. They know almost everything about their team, about scheme, about coaching. So, I mean, I don't see how you would put them outside the top 3, and I think you can make a really strong argument for number 1 overall.
I mean, what other fan base knows their offensive lineman by name? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. That's what I say. To me, it's Eagles fans are great. Steeler fans are pretty great. Dolphin fans actually travel pretty well. They're great. But yeah, it's a rare breed being an Eagle fan. I'll tell you that.
Speaking of the Eagles, before I let you go, what did you think of Jordan Mailata singing at his own wedding?
Haven't seen that yet, but it doesn't surprise me. I heard him on the Christmas album. I've heard him sing in other places. He's got to be one of the, he was on The Masked Singer, right? So he's obviously got some of the best pipes in the National Football League, so nothing shocks me there.
Well, if you want to see the video, go to 973ESPN.com. I put the video up today. He's singing during his wife's father-daughter dance with his father-in-law. So,
oh my God, that's unbelievable! I'll check that out.
If that's not a flex of how good of a singer you are, I don't know what is.
Yeah, definitely.
Geoff Mosher at Geoff P. Mosher on Twitter, InsideTheBirds.com, Inside the Birds podcast. Like, subscribe, download, give it the 5-star review. Geoff, appreciate you taking time out of your beach day to talk with me.
You got it, Josh. Always. Anything for you, brother.
Appreciate you, Geoff. Geoff Mosher joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN FM and 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Seattle. Yeah, go to 973ESPN.com. I mean, first of all, the fact that Mailata sang at his own wedding is one thing. Then he's singing while his new wife is dancing with his new father-in-law. So that's a whole flex in and of itself.